So the way we do this is to create cases and take it to the highest court in the land, being the High Court. So I ask Australians, rather than donating to this or that, set-up or society or what have you, how about we get behind Australians that are willing to stand head-on and take these challenges to the High Court? And we've got a few people that are doing that now. We have already set precedent. For the first time in Australian history, we have two lay people in the highest court of this land presenting arguments created by lay people and presented directly to the High Court justices absent any legal representation. And I do believe that all the legal fraternity are compromised. They cannot go against the states or the Commonwealth, or they will lose their practising certificate. Rod Culleton and Dr Beverly Peers are the two Australians that are standing up for the rights of every Australian. Now, we do not do any cases that are based on an individual. The only cases that are being done are those that are truly going to affect every single Australian and correct this mess. So the cases that they are putting forward are of profound constitutional significance, that being of freedom of movement, freedom of speech, and our right to bodily autonomy. And these are of great, immense interest to the general public. Rod Culleton's matter pertains to Section 92 of the Constitution, that of movement across our nation. His challenge is a collateral attack on the Clive Palmer versus WA matter 2021 in the High Court of Australia. Rod is actually arguing this case correctly, as it should have been done in the first place. Palmer did not challenge the Emergency Management Act. He merely challenged the directions issued under it. Hence, it was not a constitutional matter, as everyone was led to believe. Chief Justice Kiefel, you will find in the transcript of that case, questioned him 3 times as to whether he was challenging the validity of the Act. 3 times he said no. Hence, it was not a constitutional matter. And I shall explain. The restraint of the Constitution operates upon the Act. It does not operate upon the actions of the executive officers. That's where they get their authority, is from the Act above them. So it was not a constitutional matter. And I say, without any hesitation, the case was designed to fail, as were another 4 to 5 cases across this country, a couple in the Supreme Court. They were designed to fail, to set false precedent, and we can point out exactly where that occurred. And the common occurrence was challenging the directions of executive officers and not invalidating unconstitutional acts, which would have wiped it out. So I don't know if Clive Palmer is aware of it, but his matter actually destroyed Section 92 of the Constitution. As I said, I'm unaware if Clive Palmer is aware of this, but his QC, Queen's Counsel, Mr Dunning, knew full well what he was doing. There is no excuse. Rod's matter is very different from Clive Palmer's. Palmer's was relating to the trade and commerce limb of Section 92, where you'll find that movement across our nation is to be absolutely free. Rod is addressing the intercourse limb of Section 92, which is all about our personal and private right to move freely across the nation. And Section 92 provides a guarantee that interstate travel and movement shall be absolutely free. There's a lot of High Court, precedents and principles that have been set on this. Justice Isaacs correctly held that Section 92 is an absolute prohibition on the Commonwealth and states alike to regard state borders as barriers to intercourse between Australians. This is a well-established principle in High Court case law. Rod is also challenging the ability of the states, the rollover power of the Emergency Management Act. They did this in Victoria as well. The power of quarantine cannot transcend that of trade and commerce. That comes well and truly before quarantine. And as we know, they did not adhere to any of the qualifications that they had to. Both the state acts within their health acts and the Biosecurity Act pertaining to quarantine had specific requirements. you had to be issued as an individual a bit of paper stating what your disease was. How long were you to be quarantined for? Did they do that? No. I'm telling you right now, this has all been an IQ test and a tolerance test. It really has. We should learn not to trust government. Now, this is the thing. With Western Australia's border was shut for 2 years. Do you know that we were no longer a nation? Federation ended. That's what occurred. This is the severity of this. So Rod is going in there, he's arguing everything correctly, and there are a few other things that we are going to set straight. Rod is going to set straight in the courts. So the next one, Dr. Beverly Peers, absolutely amazing. She has 2 live matters at the moment. Now, her first one is regarding freedom of speech under sections 724 and 128 of the Constitution. You'll find it as sections 724 and 128 of the Constitution. AHPRA and the Medical Board of Australia have imposed conditions upon Dr. Beverly that she is banned, forbidden from speaking out about COVID-19 vaccines while identifying as a doctor. This is a direct violation of the implied freedom of political communication, an exercise of which is a constitutional guarantee. So the corruption, the collusion, the bias and the perversion of the course of justice in the state courts across this nation is astronomical, absolutely astronomical. There is no separation of powers whatsoever. It is also very important to note, as I said before, everything is turned into corporate. So we are under an illusion that things are operating lawfully. They are not. There is no law. AHPRA have admitted in writing they are not even a limb of government. Okay? So you're not a limb of government. You're actually a statutory corporation administering law from the national law. You can't do it. You're a statutory corporation. You've got no authority, no lawful authority at all. So, and the government is a prime example, of course, as well, of a corporation. They've got no authority to administer or write laws. And it is commonplace across this nation. There are so many challenges. I could literally talk for weeks about this, but I am a bit restricted for time. I'll give you another example. The states are actually getting together and creating bodies such as AHPRA and fraudulently naming themselves. For example, AHPRA is the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority. I'm sorry, you're a state body. You haven't got the right to use Australia in your name at all. It's all an illusion to make out as though they got the authority that they do not. Now, Dr. Beverly took this into the Supreme Court, and Justice Watson dismissed her rights and sided with AHPRA, undermining the Constitution. That has now been appealed, and Dr. Beverly is waiting for her date in the Supreme Court of Victoria of Appeals to challenge his decision. All the doctors across the states and territories lost their licences or had their licences suspended, all under the national law, which is another very interesting thing. The national law is an act of Queensland. It has been adopted into Victoria and every other state and territory, but it has not gone through the constitutional due process pursuant to section 5137 of the Constitution, which is a referral power. States are not allowed to just adopt each other's acts. So we've got a national law operating across this nation from, I don't know how many doctors we were up to, 30 doctors, I think, committed suicide after losing their licences from under this national law that's being administered by a statutory corporation. We're in strife, and unless we stand up, this crap is going to continue. So, Dr. Beverly Peers' second matter, this is relating to section 109 of the Constitution, inconsistency of laws. If a law of the state is inconsistent with a law of the Commonwealth, the latter shall prevail, being the Commonwealth or Federal Act, and the former, to the extent of the inconsistency, being every state and territory act, will be invalid. So we have got here, Dr. Peers is challenging the validity of the Public Health and Wellbeing Act because she's in Victoria. But her challenge is applicable to every state and territory's health act, as every single one of those health acts is where they mandated vaccination as a requirement to work. Dr. Beverly's case is irrefutable. These state acts are both directly and indirectly inconsistent with a federal act, that being the Federal Fair Work Act of Australia 2009, where the Commonwealth have clearly evinced their intention. They have in writing at section 26 of the Fair Work Act, this act is to the exclusion of any state industrial law. Then at section 26.2, the Fair Work Act clearly defines what is a state industrial law. It would be any state act that puts conditions into the workplace, that puts regulations into the workplace, that has something to do with agreements between the employer and employee. Every single state and territory health act meets the qualifications and is the exact definition of a state industrial law. And they knew it. They knew what they were doing. So we have got Dr. Beverly. This is a big thing with this matter. So the challenge is, other than the section 109, which it's clearly evident, the Federal Act had lost its operation. It could not operate until the qualifications of these state and territory health acts were met, being that of vaccination. That is an indirect consistency and a direct inconsistency as it was written within the Act. So Dr. Beverly, in addition, is challenging the ability of corporations to circumvent the Constitution or a federal act. So the first question being, of course, can state acts circumvent the Constitution or a federal act? No, they cannot. Absolutely not. So the next question, can corporations, through their corporation policies, circumvent the Constitution or federal law? No, they can't. Yet you'll find that the state acts have impugned those requirements. They're no longer in the state acts, but they're still sitting on the books. This is the importance of getting Dr. Beverly's matter addressed ASAP. And this is where I ask all Australians, please sign on and support this amazing woman. Her and her sister, twin sister, Dr. Beverly Peers, have been fighting in the courts for all Australians now for a couple of years, and they need your support. Dr. Beverly had $60,000 of costs against her. You know, I see all this money donated to, you know, causes that are just dead-end causes. And we've got people who are standing up there doing things, really putting themselves on the line for all Australians. With this second challenge, questioning whether or not corporate policies can circumvent the Constitution or federal law, will have a very, very broad application. So I know this is something that's going to affect all of us. Education department and the schools, are you not corporations? So how can you force our children to be vaccinated in order to attend university, school or kindergarten? We have got to stop this rubbish. It's up to us. This is the thing. I'm confident to say Dr. Beverly's matter is one of the most significant cases that has ever been brought to the court in our history, and no doubt for perhaps another 100 years, because the states, by making vaccination a requirement to go to work, was the biggest control mechanism they had over all of us. You get vaccinated or you lose your livelihood. You can't afford to feed your family or keep a roof over your head. How many people took it because of that? It's unconscionable. It is unconscionable what they have done to Australians, and we need to make them accountable. So Please support Dr. Beverly. I will just add, when I was researching about my forefathers, the Marquis of Montrose, they're from the family of Montrose, the clan of Graham. I was speaking to Dr. Valerie. So I've only just recently found out we are actually of the same bloodline. I only just recently found that out, and I have admired these women for so long. There are two 80-year-old twin sisters who just stand, they take no rubbish. They face the justices, they face the defence, and they let them have it. There's no bowing down to your honourable this or that. They stand their ground. I love it. I'm so proud to say they're my bloodline. Yeah. A mother shall rise as a lioness, and a grandmother will stand as an ancient oak. Neither shall yield when their young are threatened. I stand in steadfast resolve, dedicating my life to implementing change by peaceful and lawful means. Following in the steps of my forefathers, I composed the Solemn League and Covenant for the people of the Commonwealth and the Solemn Notice of Accountability. These are lawful and peaceful instruments of constitutional redress. So this is always, and we can do, as I said before, we can make by decree commands because we are the sovereign beneficiaries of this nation by inherent right. So with these, we the people of the Commonwealth, we do not ask, we command. And these documents that I have written are also stating our claim of right. It is our claim of right. And if you go into equity and trust law, the government as agents, administrators, servants and trustees of the Commonwealth have forfeited their role. They have sold us out. And we as the beneficiaries, we are duty bound to stand up and take back what is ours for the sake of our children. We are absolutely duty bound. So please, everybody, get behind Dr. Beverly Peers, Rod Cullerton and Dr. Valerie Peers. If anybody is, I have got some of the notices of accountability and the solemn covenant, solemn league and covenants up at the back there. We're going to hand around a bucket, please. If anybody can help donate towards Dr. Beverly, we'll take photographs of you as you hand the money over so we've got a clean record, count it all, and we'll give the figure at the end of the day. But these people are standing up. We have got a lot of cases written. I'm even going to ask Jamie if he'd like to take one on, Jamie McIntyre. This is the way we do it through the High Court. We have got cases written already to lodge, to knock out these Jewish lobbyists from trying to stop our freedom of speech. It is not a crime to offend someone, okay? It is not a crime. The only thing you cannot do is incite violence, but they are twisting and manipulating everything. And I think as Jamie said as well, this anti-Semitic rubbish, the Semites are the Palestinians, the Semites are the Arabs, the Middle Eastern. Jamie touched on the head, most of these Zionist Jews are from Europe. The other interesting thing is they have infiltrated themselves into races and cultures for hundreds and hundreds of years. They hide themselves and disguise themselves, whether you want to call them the Tuatha De Dan, whether you want to call them the Ashkenazi. Look at the word Ashkenazi. The spelling of that, the last four letters spell Nazi. What is the Ashkenazi's most sacred of doctrines? It is the mystical Kabbalah, which is related to the Talmud, which is related to the Tarot. And what is one of their three most sacred of symbols? The swastika. We own an absolutely upside-down world, and it's up to us to stand our ground. They're trying to stop us speaking our truth. Always stand in honour and in good conscience, and this is what I have put into my covenant for Australians of honour and conscience to remain peaceful and lawful and make sure we have all of this redress that we require through the courts and through the correct mechanisms. These documents are all about a reclamation of the Commonwealth. We are claiming our right and taking it back. And we are also commanding that we have law, constitutional law restored to this land, because currently there is none. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Jamal. Is anyone here familiar with my work? Good. For those of you that aren't, I don't want to be presumptuous. My name is Joel Jamal. I'm the head of Turning Point Australia. I decided to come up here to do a talk, but unfortunately, guilt by association. The media doesn't want us to hear from certain individuals here. They don't want us to hear from Jamie. Now, as an Aussie, I've got a problem with that. I've got a big problem with that. I don't like cancellation. I don't like censorship. So I am partly filling in. Jason's been doing a great job last minute. Jason's been filling in as MC for this event. You might see me chair a few conversations, like I'm about to do one with the lovely Adrien McCrae. So I'll be talking tomorrow. I'll be talking to you about how we can get the country back on track electorally, some tangible ways we can fight different elections. But right now I'm going to take you through Adrien McCrae. Who is he? Adrien McCrae is an Australian businessman and politician from Port Hedland, WA. Originally, we love WA, don't we? We love our farmers out there. We love the sheep export. Originally from a farming family in New South Wales, he founded a mining company, which we'll come to in our discussion, and he also founded the wings of Kilimanjaro Charity. Elected as a Port Hedland councillor, I know some of you have heard of Port Hedland, in 2024, he sparked controversy with his appearance on Russian media for observing the election, but he is widely respected in freedom circles around Western Australia. Why is he respected? Why do I respect Adrien? Well, he's got skin in the game. He's someone that puts his money where his mouth is. He shows leadership both behind the scenes, but also up front. He takes the risks on organising events, much like Jamie McIntyre. And he's someone that is really respected in WA, especially because he flies out speakers that wouldn't ordinarily go to Perth or Australia. He flies them out, pays for their flights, puts on the event, takes a risk on, just like Jamie has with this one. And he's someone that really does get behind the freedom movement over there, like the Light Australia newspaper. Ladies and gentlemen, before I bring Adrien McCrae up, we're going to play this very short 60-second video, and then I'm going to invite him up for an interview.
Port Hedland councillor Adrien McCrae has been back on Russian TV, this time quoting a former Nazi party member and attacking Australian and Western media. Is that appropriate for a councillor to do?
Look, it's time for the councillor to go. He's an embarrassment to the city, to the town of Port Hedland. He's an embarrassment to Western Australia. He's using his councillor position and the privileges which come with that position to advance some international right-wing ideological position. It's, quite frankly, an abuse of his position. He has an obligation to conduct himself in a manner which is consistent with the needs and the requirements of his job, which is to focus on the people of Port Hedland, not engage in some sort of wacky ideological debate about a freedom of speech in Russia. Quite frankly, I think everyone in Port Hedland would be embarrassed by his antics, and I think it's time that he resigns.
Does the government have any power to remove him?
Look, we obviously need to investigate what rules and regulations he's transgressed in relation to his role as a councillor, but I think his councillor colleagues and the leadership of the town of Port Hedland should be sending him a very strong message, the same message I'm sending him today. Resign, stop it, you're an embarrassment.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Adrien McCrae. Have a seat. All right, so someone likes to stir the pot. Adrien, first question. Why do you have such a lack of self-preservation? You got no sense of it. You really don't care about yourself, do you?
Look, testing. Look, good question, Joel. I think what we've all been through the last 5 years in particular, I don't sort of look at it as self-preservation. It's more preservation of our societies, of our communities, and probably in a greater picture of our country as a whole. I've sort of always been into pushing the limit on certain things. I think I'm still the only person in the world who's jumped off the summit of Kilimanjaro 3 times. I was a pilot as a young guy, straight out of high school. You kind of put yourself in positions when you get past that point of no return where it's always life or death. It's been in an aeroplane or running at a cliff with a paraglider above your head. You just kind of learn that, there are risks, and in anything in life, it's a risk-reward thing, and certainly the reward is too enormous for what we've been fighting, and particularly the last 5 years, that I'm going to stand back when I have sort of the knowledge and the ability to do, make small changes, certainly in my community, and probably in a larger scope with what we've been able to do in Port Hedland with the Port Hedland motion that many of you may be aware of. So yeah, look, it's not. I don't sort of think of it as myself as some sort of hero that I'm, putting myself out there. I was just doing what anyone I think in my position would do if they had, my background and my knowledge.
Well, look, it is commendable, and I know everyone in here is nodding their head to that. Now, before we get to foreign politics, I do just want to ask you a question about Australia, because I mentioned mining company. You kind of know how the country works with lobbying. You understand what's going on with infrastructure. Over the last 100 years, 200 years, Australia, we really did do more nation-building projects. Like we were building dams, building the harbour bridge. We were refining our own oil here. Whereas more recently, we don't have like Project Iron Boomerang, where we're mining iron ore and we're sending it overseas. Instead, we're not actually making the steel ourselves. What is going on with Australia? Because I feel like we see similar patterns in Rhodesia, with Iran, with other foreign countries that are on the way up, but then they get kneecapped. Why don't we see these projects happening in Australia? Because you've sort of been in that sort of area, these nation-building projects. It's like we got cut off at the knees.
Look, another great question, Joel, and it's an extremely loaded question. There's a lot of layers, and a lot of layers of the onion to peel back. Someone said to me only, I think yesterday, actually, one of the members of the audience that I was having a chat with about this particular thing only the last couple of days, and really Australia has become a third world country. Now that's probably for us sitting in this room, and we all live quite wealthy lives comparatively to what we look on as third world. But when we look at our resources in this country, we've handed them sadly through years of mismanagement, and I guess there's part of the problem is very short political terms, so people never think in big nation building projects. No one's sort of thinking anything longer than a 3-year cycle. Usually it's we saw in that 2010 to 2020 time period we had 7 prime ministers in 10 years, and people just the power of social media. We could lose a prime minister just over one simple policy idea. Bottle of wine. Yeah, a bottle of wine or whatever it was. So of course, it's hard when these big multinational companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and all the usual suspects are able to take ownership of our resources, and at the same time, when there's nothing in it for them to sort of allow us to use those resources, and then sort of years of sadly revolving door politics where the likes of Scott Morrison, who signs an AUKUS deal worth hundreds of billions of dollars, basically as a provocation to China, then immediately goes and works for the Dine Corporation, who was the military-industrial contractor who was set to make billions of dollars out of that on the Australian taxpayer. And that's been going on for a long time. Alexander Downer, another one, he was part of signing over huge resources of Australian gas off the western shelf of Australia, and now is has since been working for Chevron, who was obviously a huge beneficiary of those those enormous amounts of resources. And now, as a nation, I was only talking with an Australian politician recently in the Brisbane airport when I was passing through here, and we spoke about what happens with our resources. And in 2019, many of you would know, 2019 Australia became the biggest exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas, in the world. We overtook Qatar that year. We're only in the lead for a short amount of time because under the Donald Trump years, obviously there's a lot of gas opened up in the US and US leapfrogged us both. But in 2019, we're the biggest gas exporter in the world. And at that time, we, as a nation, got about $600 million of revenue from the entire export of being the biggest exporter in the world. In that same year, Qatar, who exported less gas than us, they got $29 billion for less gas than we exported. They got almost exactly 50 times more value out for their nation. And so it's going back to calling Australia a third world nation. It's the fact that we've got this massive amount of resource with and a massive amount of land with so few people. We sort of get to spread the the enormous wealth of, I guess, a labour force rather than the actual resource itself. If the nation actually was able to benefit from its own resources, we would probably be the most developed and wealthy nation in the world, bar none. But as it is, we'd live a very high quality of life, but live a very third world quality of political paradigm.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they do see that. They see that change and they're like, I wonder what people like Adrien who've been in those circles in terms of, the mining industry, what's up with that? How does that tend to work? But let's move to something which really did make international headlines, 200 million views online, the Port Hedland motion to actually hold an inquiry into the jabs and the contamination of the jabs. Briefly, could you mind letting people know exactly, in case they missed it, in case they didn't see the stream, what was that about? Why did you do it? What did you see as the big win from that?
Look, I've studied orthomolecular medicine, so nutritional medicine as a hobby for probably about 20 years. I lost a couple of close friends to cancer about 20 years ago, and I sort of been studying that stuff for a long time. And when the COVID thing came around, obviously I've been sort of involved in political affairs in Australia and internationally. Most of my life I run big charity events in Eastern Africa and do these sorts of projects. So when COVID came around, I was sort of across a lot of the nonsense and didn't fall for a lot of the hype early on. I was quite outspoken in Western Australia, and I was noticing a lot of big speakers were coming to the Eastern Seaboard but not visiting WA. So in 2023, when Dr. Malhotra was touring Australia, I got in touch with the organisers for his trip, and I invited him, would he come over to Western Australia? Now, West Australians, they miss out on a lot of these type of events like we're holding here. And so I spoke with him, and then I thought, well, to make it worth his while, I'll get some other big name speakers. I was fortunate to get hold of Ed Dowd. Many of you would know, ex-BlackRock investment banker, who was speaking out against a lot of the numbers and a lot of the science that was being pushed out. And of course, I got Ed Dowd. I also got Naomi Wolf, who was very left wing. She'd come from New York Times, very left New York, but she'd spoke out against the COVID stuff when she'd learned a lot of the. Obviously, she'd written the Pfizer papers and did a lot of research on it. So I put on a big event in Perth, and that was kind of it was the week before Mark McGowan at the time resigned, but we put a fair bit of pressure on McGowan to come to this event, and there was a lot of media around this event. We had front page stuff on the only newspaper in WA, the West, and of course we like to put our hand up to say that we were partially responsible for making Mark Gowan resign at the time he did. But look, of course that was just part of our media ploy. We probably had nothing to do with that. But through that, I through the connections that I made at that time, became good friends with those speakers, and Dr. Malhotra invited me over to London. We did a bit of travel through Europe together, and he asked me later would I put on host a show for him and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. During RFK's presidential campaign in San Francisco. So I put on a show for Bobby and Dr. Malhotra, and also flew in Vandana Shiva, who many of you would know from India. Dr. Drew, I got Dr. Drew to be a host, and Steve Kirsch, who was here. Steve put on an event after party at Steve's house on the night of the show, so that was really fun to get to meet Steve, because I'd been following Steve religiously up until that time, so it was a great honour, and thank you again, Steve, for allowing us the use of your beautiful home. But through that time, once you sort of start to move in those circles, particularly Steve and the US crowd, because at that time we were all following, Dr. Malone and Dr. McCullough and RFK and all these people. And when you sort of start to call these people friends, I was fortunate to be invited to a lot of the children's health events things, and then in May of last year, I was invited to go to the World Health Organization rallies in Geneva, Switzerland, and there was about 100 sort of key guests, and then obviously there was the regular crowd that was invited to come and march alongside us at the WHO rallies all through Geneva. Again, Steve was another attendee there, so we got to catch up again. But at that time, I got to meet and become good friends with Del, and also a Canadian virologist or microbiologist actually called Dr. David Speaker from Canada. And so Dr. David Speaker put his hand up. There was a time that there was the children versus, many of you would know about the children case versus children versus Moderna in the High Court of Australia, that Katie Ashby-Coppins and Peter Pham and Julian Gillespie, these guys were putting a case through the High Court, but we'd heard from Kevin McKernan, probably the world's #1 geneticist. He was head of the Human Genome Project at MIT, part of the group that dissected the human genome over a 6-year period. But there wouldn't be a better geneticist on the planet than Kevin McKernan. And he had found in 2023, he had found through, just by mistake, that people had kept sending him, owning a genetic testing company, he had discovered people kept sending him all these vials of Pfizer and Moderna vials, and just randomly one day he wanted to get some pure RNA for one of the tests he was doing, and he did a test on some of these Moderna and Pfizer vials and found that these things were far from pure. They were actually heavily contaminated, like thousands of times over the World Health Organization legal limits of DNA contamination in the mRNA solutions. And so during the Moderna versus the children case in the High Court of Australia, the legal team got their hands on a bunch of vials of the mRNA and the mRNA jabs for the Pfizer and the Moderna, and asked all over Australia, can someone test these for us? We want to see if you can replicate the same thing that they found in the American vials in America. And no one in Australia would touch it. No universities, no scientific labs, because they could all potentially risk losing their accreditation from the Australian government if it turned out that Australia had the same contamination as they were finding in other places in the world. So they looked further afield. And of course, this has been a big part of what we learned through the whole COVID experience, is why this event like we're having now is because free speech, America still has free speech, so doctors could speak up. If a doctor spoke up in Australia, everyone in this room knows this, hopefully most people probably watching online would know this. But doctors in Australia and Australians as a whole, we don't have a Bill of Rights, we don't have a right to free speech. Whereas thank God Americans do have, and it's that ability of having that right to free speech which allowed doctors over there to speak up, and that gave us all these American doctors, why we sort of followed so many American doctors in Australia. We had probably just as many per capita, maybe more, speaking up in Australia, but couldn't do it publicly. They were very private, so no one really got to meet them or know who they were. But having had the American doctors with this freedom, this right to free speech, we learned that we could go offshore to get our information. Most of us got all our knowledge that we have of the whole COVID pandemic now came from America because of people like Steve Kirsch, and also because of great doctors like Ryan Cole and obviously Robert Malone, Dr. McCullough, these people that weren't going to lose their medical license to tell the truth. So through learning that, this Canadian microbiologist put his hand up in the University of Guelph, Dr. David Speaker, and said, I'll test your vials because your government can't prosecute me in Canada, can't prosecute me from here. Let me test them. So they shipped the Australian vials over to Canada, a bunch of Moderna, a bunch of Pfizer. And what Dr. Speaker found was that the Australian vials were up to 145 times the legal allowable limit through the TGA, but it's a very standardised thing. It's 10 nanograms per dose of DNA contamination. In most countries of the world that are signed on to the WHO, it's the same limit, 10 nanograms per injection. Now these things, the Australian vials, were discovered to be 145 times over. Now, David published this and found this information, and once he alerted the Australian authorities, no one did anything. The only one who did something in Australia was, he was a member of Parliament for representative for Monash, Russell Broadbent from Victoria, Liberal Party member from Victoria. He wrote a letter to the Prime Minister in September, and he had 25 of the world's leading doctors, scientists, biologists, virologists, biochemists, you name it, had signed on to his letter to the Prime Minister, and it was ignored. He didn't get so much as a response. So he thought, okay, they all got together, Russell and David Speaker, and said, what can we do? Maybe we need to explain it better. So they put together a scientific summary. What does this DNA contamination really mean? And they got another 26, actually, ended up being 52, of the leading doctors, geneticists, you name it, the who's who of medical science on the planet had all signed on to this document and sent to the Prime Minister in Canberra. Now, the Prime Minister once again ignored this. Now, this is in September, so I was in the unique position that I was good personal friends with a Member of Parliament, Russell Broadbent. I was also good personal friends with David Speaker, the scientist. Now, I'm in Port Hedland, which, as many of you would know, Port Hedland, the Prime Ministers of Australia often call Port Hedland the engine room of Australia, because certainly during the GFC of 2008 through 2010-11, when the world was going into recession, Australia was in a boom because the iron ore price in Port Hedland had kept the Australian economy afloat through its massive amount of iron ore export. In fact, you know, it varies depending on iron ore price. The Port Hedland can contribute anywhere between 5 and 8% of Australia's national GDP flows through our little town of Port Hedland. And so the Prime Minister, when Albanese was elected, they called the first cabinet, or the national cabinet meeting of the Prime Minister and Premiers, they brought it to Port Hedland, basically as a show of significance to, you know, Port Hedland and the significance on the national economy and the geostrategic importance of the entire town. And so I was in this unique position. I'm now on the council. I'd had quite a bit of notoriety because earlier last year, when I was invited as the only Australian international foreign observer for the Russian presidential election. Now, of course, many people would know me from that because when I came back, within 3 days of being back in the country, I didn't even campaign. Some friends wanted to use my name in local government election to win a by-election, and they used my name while I was overseas. I didn't campaign, didn't do anything, and of course, I won the election while I was in Russia. And so when I come back... Oops, exactly. So when I come back to Australia, I'm now... The first day I landed back, I took my oath of office. The first thing I did on the morning I landed back, I took my oath of office, and that afternoon I had the first ordinary council meeting of local government. Now, of course, no one cared about my statements in the Russian media prior to taking oath of office. As soon as I took the oath of office, the Sydney Morning Herald, within 3 days, the Sydney Morning Herald had me as the #1 news story in the world, simply for being an elected official and daring tell the truth about what I'd seen in a Russian presidential election. Now, I've run in federal politics just in 2022. I've scrutinised the referendum in 2024. I've scrutinised local, state and federal government elections. I had an understanding of it, but I just thought, what an opportunity to be invited to go and oversee the Russian presidential election. I was only invited because another speaker that's speaking tomorrow, I think Ross Cameron is here somewhere. He was also invited, but he had a back injury and he had back surgery, so he couldn't come across. Now, and there are other members of Parliament actually invited, but they couldn't go because they were just too scared of what might happen to them politically if they went over to Russia. I wasn't in politics at the time, so of course for me it was an adventure. What a great thing to go and see. If it was a US election or it was any country's election that's significant on the world stage, I think most people would go who've had that opportunity. And so of course I had this big notoriety, and I'd had some quite public stoushes with the Premier after coming back and telling the truth about what I'd seen in the Russian presidential election. And so fast forward back to October, after the Prime Minister had just ignored all these letters from Russell Broadbent. I thought, what if Port Hedland? Imagine if I could get the Port Hedland Council, the most, as the engine room of Australia, where men, I like to say, are still men. It's it's a tough working class mining crowd, as you can imagine. We all wear high vis. It's not often we get to dress like this, and so I. As fate would have it, I also had Julian Gillespie, one of the original ex-barrister who was travelling around Australia, and he was part of the letter writing to the Prime Minister. He was part of all the legal cases that we saw in the High Court. Brilliant man that's donated years of his time. It's incredible the amount of work he's done. But he happened to be staying in my house because he was travelling around Australia and he was in Port Hedland at the time. And I said, "Hey Jules, what do you think we write a motion and see if we can't get the town of Port Hedland to back up Russell Broadbent. And he was absolutely all over it, so we put some motions together. And as just randomly, I mean, I've been following the COVID stuff closely for a long time, and my own company had just finished construction of a new cold body storage facility in Port Hedland. And we always joke, you know, if this COVID thing goes bad, how funny would it be? Not funny, but, you know, if you want to make some money in business, we probably should go into the cold body storage business. Now, funnily enough, I end up building a new cold body storage facility in my own town. The first time the town's ever had one. We're a town of 15,000 people. It's not like we need them, you know, there's one death a week there, they say. Anyway, so I just finished building a cold body storage facility, and I spoke to the funeral director, and I said, are you seeing anything different from, you know, recently? Why are we building a cold body storage facility in the little town of Port Hedland? And he said, it's funny. He goes, at the height of COVID, we weren't doing a single funeral a week. In fact, we almost went out of business. Instead, we started a training business and teaching people to drive mining machinery and all sorts of random businesses like this. But he goes, and his excuse was through me, but he goes, after they opened the borders, because as many of you would know, the Western Australian borders were closed. We couldn't leave the state. We couldn't go out or come into our state for 2 years as Australians. We weren't allowed to go and see our families or anything interstate. And he said, it's funny, when they opened the borders, we stopped doing one funeral a week. We went up to one funeral a day. So the death rate increased sevenfold. And I said, what else happened at the time of opening the borders? You remember why they opened the borders? Because remember, the borders wouldn't open unless we had a 90% vaccination rate. And I said, what else surely it's not the borders could cause this sudden spike in deaths of sevenfold deaths. And he goes, no, it's not he goes, it's just they've obviously let the virus in. I said, but the virus is already here. And he goes, no, well, that's what it's done. They've let the virus in. I said, you don't think it could be this thing they're sticking in people's arms? He goes, no, it's not that. And I said, how do you know it's not that? And he says, well, me and my wife, we've had 6 each. And it was just, I was like, I might be putting you in your own cold body storage facility. Anyway, so, sorry, I've gone off track. I've gone off track a little bit. But I shouldn't say that because if they're watching, they're friends of mine. But
It's good it's not being live streamed.
Anyway, so I asked Jules if we thought, let's put some motions together. So we put the motions together, and I called a special council meeting. To call a special council meeting, you've got to have support of a couple of other councillors. So we got 3 councillors to sign a document to go to council and to call a special meeting. And we called it on a Friday night because on the Monday night, as it turns out, I'm great friends with John Shipton, Julian Assange's father, and he wanted to go, who was also at Steve's house in the US. John comes to all of my big projects and big events and speaks at them, a wonderful speaker. Most of you have probably heard of him and seen him. But I just asked if we could, got my councillors to agree with it, but John wanted to go to Russia to the BRICS conference in November, or in end of October last year. And he didn't know anyone in Russia. I said, listen, I'll come with you if you want a companion. And I knew a lot of people over there by now. So I said, look, I'll go with you to Russia. So we called the special meeting on a Friday night, which is very unusual because meetings usually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in Port Hedland. So we got a big amount of the community to turn up to this meeting. And of course, there was only 7 of us on council at the time. And out of the 9, 2 people had resigned. And on the night, we had 2 fence sitters. And as it would have it, literally the day before the council meeting, Rebecca Barnett had got a Freedom of Information request returned from the Australian government from the TGA because she had asked maybe a year earlier, what testing method are you using to validate your claims that these things are not DNA contaminated? And the Freedom of Information request had come back. More than 80% of the document was redacted, but part of the document that wasn't redacted, the TGA said, we are using the qualitative polymerase chain reaction, the qPCR test, to say that these aren't DNA contaminated. Now, Moderna, who holds the world patent for measuring DNA in mRNA drug solutions, they'd had that patent since 2015. Now, we had that patent in our hands, and that patent clearly says that if you want to find out how much DNA is in an mRNA drug solution, you do not use the qPCR. If you do, it will underread. It can underread 1,000-fold. But this is what the TGA of Australia is using to gaslight all Australians into saying that this stuff is safe and effective. Don't worry, we've tested it, it's safe. The DNA contamination is not an issue. Now, I had both documents, and on the night, I also had a deputation from Angus Dalgleish, probably one of the world's leading oncologists. He's a professor emeritus from St George's University in London. Of course, a lot of the scientists and doctors we saw speaking out through all of this COVID stuff were retirees because they could come out. Luc Montagnier, you remember originally he was the discoverer of the AIDS, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist or virologist who discovered the HIV virus. He was the first to point out that, or one of the first to point out, that the original, the strain or the original strain of the COVID virus, the SARS-CoV-2 from 2019, was clearly man-made. He'd said that before anyone had even heard of the virus because he'd looked at it, and because he was retired, there's nothing that any government department could do to say that most people were scared to speak the truth because they'd lose their funding or they'd lose whatever else. But Luc Montagnier he was well past retirement age. He actually died only a year before last. But so it was all those sort of calibre of people that were speaking up at the time. Anyway, going back to the Port Hedland thing, we had the motion, and of course the motion because of this thing, and we had the deputation of Professor Angus Dalgleish, and when he made his deputation, the mayor, because we hadn't seen the video, he made a video presentation, was already pre-recorded earlier in the day, and so the mayor said we need to close the meeting down. We had to kick out all the gallery, all the people in the public out of the meeting because he wasn't sure what was on this thing. When we played the video, while we're out of standing orders, I said to the rest of the council, I said, listen, if any of you are going to tell me, because I knew what their debate would be, they'd say this is out of our remit, we're local government, we're not supposed to touch federal issues, state issues. And I said, if any of you are going to tell me that this has been tested, the TGA's already debunked this, here's the documents I've got. I've got this freedom of information saying the Australian government's using the qPCR, and I've got the Moderna patent which says the qPCR doesn't work, you can't use it. And of course, having those two documents, all these other councillors looked at me and went, shit, there goes our argument. Now when the debate comes up, what are we going to say if we say it in front of the public? And I just said, if you bring that up in front of the crowd, when the crowd comes back in the room, I'm going to destroy you in my closing argument. And they're all like, oh, okay, well, no one really knew what to do. So eventually, the vote went 5-2. And I didn't know. I thought, okay, it'll probably make local news, make big news. But literally within 24 hours, there was millions of views across Twitter. It was we were the first government in the world that had actually voted to demand a cessation, to stop all mRNA injections until such time as they could do some testing to show what the dangers of this stuff is. Now the TGA has since come out, and the TGA has said, look, it doesn't even matter if it's 1,000 times over the limit. The DNA contamination can't get inside your cell. Now this new technology, as someone here asked earlier, asked Steve about the mechanism of injury that we're seeing. What is the chemical, or is there something in them that's causing the problem? And I've had this chat with some of the greatest scientists in the world, and I'm fortunate to have probably somewhat of an answer to that. The DNA contamination, there is hundreds of different types of DNA. We don't even know what they all are. But this DNA, if you inject DNA like in an old tetanus shot from the 1980s into your arm, the human immune system will recognise that foreign DNA, destroy it immediately, and it'll be excreted through the liver and through the kidneys and excreted from your body. But this new technology of the coded messenger RNA, or the modified RNA as some call it, is wrapped inside lipid nanoparticles. It's basically a cationic, a positively charged cationic lipid nanoparticle, meaning it's like a little cholesterol, tiny, 1,000 times smaller. And in each injection, there is about as many as 40 trillion of these lipid nanoparticles in every injection. Now, these lipid nanoparticles are designed specifically to bypass your immune system. No one's immune system can break down anything that's inside those lipid nanoparticles. And those lipid nanoparticles, I said they're cationic, meaning they're positively charged, which by nature of law of physics, positively charged means they're attracted to the cell lining of the cell lining of the walls, which is negatively charged, and then through the mechanism of the same way cholesterol works in your system, it dissolves into your cell wall, and the payload of that lipid nanoparticle, all of it gets inside your cell. Now, this DNA contamination we're finding is not free, loose in the solution. It's wrapped and encapsulated in lipid nanoparticles. And so in every injection that humans are getting as many as 30 trillion messenger RNA particles wrapped inside lipid nanoparticles inside your cell. Now, some of these DNA fragments are what's called the SV40 promoter enhancer sequences, and this is the most frightening part, because the SV40, as many people would know, scientific laboratories all around the world, when they're trying to induce cancer tumours in rats or animals, they inject SV40, it causes a tumour, then they can go and do their tests on the cancer drugs that they're trying to promote for patenting for some sort of profiteering motive. Now, it only takes 3 of these SV40 promoter enhancer sequences to get inside a human cell to begin the cancer process, to start the genetic changes to start the cancer process. We're talking hundreds of billions of SV40 promoter enhancer sequences inside of every shot, which are encapsulated lipid nanoparticles, which is now why Australia, you've probably all seen only in the last few weeks, the Mail and a bunch of newspapers, Yahoo 7 has started talking about Australia now has the highest cancer rates in the world, and these cancers are horribly aggressive. They're, the new term, who'd ever heard of turbo cancer prior to the last 4 years? So when this thing obviously went quite viral, it obviously upset the Premier. The Premier attacked me. First he came after the Port Hedland Council because he didn't realise it was me, the Russian shit stirrer, that had a bit of a fight with him earlier in the year. And then, of course, 3 days after, he said to the press that the Port Hedland Council needs to stick to their knitting. Now that pissed off councillors all across Australia, particularly Western Australia, because we work a lot. We don't get paid for what we do. It's just, it's a very thankless job. And so when I appeared a few days later in Russia, because I was over there with John Shipton to go to the BRICS conference, of course, when I turned up, I was the councillor that became world news for telling the truth about the Russian presidential election. There was media at the airport, and it just became one press conference after another. And so it was quite funny because the Premier is talking to, he saw me in Russia. Next thing they're saying that I was quoting Nazis, and I was over there at the behest of Vladimir Putin, all these nonsense stories.
Look how racist he is.
And of course, the Premier was, quite aggressive. I mean, he's had, and that's just one video you saw when I started. There's dozens of them, but he and I sort of fired back. He would tell me I need to resign. Then I'd say, well, listen, you were the health minister that force injected 90% of West Australians with a contaminated DNA gene editing therapy. I think it's you who needs to resign. I'm not resigning. Anyway, of course, that made it worse. Sorry, mate, we're going to wrap up. Anyway, so yeah, that's how I end up in the public stoush.
So you're an anti-vaxxer, okay. So it sounds like he doesn't know what he's talking about, does he? He has no idea. Mate, that was a mate. You took me to school. We could chat for another hour. Maybe 2. And this is the problem. This is why we need a whole country between us. I'm in Sydney. He's in Perth most of the time, Port Hedland. And I could chat to you forever, man, but I really appreciate it. I think there is a panel later with you. We didn't even get into foreign affairs. We didn't even get into Israel-Palestine. We didn't even get into that, but we will later. But ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Adrien McCrae. Thanks, mate. Well done. I'll take that off you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up, first of all, for Joel Jamal. Make some noise. I can't hear you. Come on, guys. Get involved. Bring some energy, folks. Joel Jamal, highly intelligent man, knows the political system so well. Very, very good interviewer. Thank you, Joel. And Adrien McCrae. Where are you, Adrien? There he is. Seriously, I will never forget the moment when I saw his video that went viral. And I thought, when do we get more Australian men like this one? Where do we find more of them? Give it up for Adrien McCrae, please. What has been incredibly hard to see is just how few strong Australian male voices we've had over the last 5 years. It's been heartbreaking. There's been so few. I remember when I started making my videos at the start of COVID, I thought I would have had millions of Aussie men behind me. And it was the opposite. I had people trying to destroy my life. And there's been a few men who came along. I remember when Graham Hood first came out. And give it up for Hoodie. Because there was a few crazy nut job tin hat conspiracy theorists like myself making videos in cars or on skateboards who were getting some traction and making some noise. But we didn't have credibility. You know, I didn't have the credibility of a Qantas pilot. You know what I mean? And Graham brought incredible credibility to this movement. Much like Adrien McCrae, the credibility that he brought with the councillors saying, hang on a minute, we've got a 7-fold increase in mortalities in a small town. There's something going on. And so I just salute you, Adrien, for your courage. Takes some mighty big cojones to do that. So grateful for people like yourself, Adrien. And our next guest fits that description as well. Just a man of incredible courage. And when I saw him show up and his videos going viral, I thought, thank God, there's more men of honour and credibility and integrity in this country. So few and so far between, but he spent 30 years as a New South Wales police officer and served with distinction through that career, serving and protecting his community. And comes from that era when we used to really value and appreciate and respect our police force. You know, they used to be part of our community in such a special way. And COVID changed all that. They enforced the madness for the most part. They were enforcing these insane public health mandates. But one police officer decided he would not do that and stood down and resigned. And he's just a man with the biggest heart, incredible integrity, huge courage. Please give him a massive welcome to the stage, Roland Crystal. Come on, Roland. Make some noise, guys. Come on. Give it up. Roland Crystal.
Thanks so much, Dave. Much appreciated. You know, we all love a story, don't we? And we haven't had, well, we've had stories, but I'm going to give you a little story myself that's dear to my heart, and I've told a couple of times on some of my videos and so on, but I imagine most of you haven't heard it. Went on holidays with my family down to Tasmania. Beautiful, beautiful place. But I had an incident down there. And I came back to New South Wales and I described this incident to a young fella who's known me for many years because he's a friend of my daughter. And he knows that I'm a long-term police officer, that I have a certain degree of credibility. And so I thought I'd play a bit of a mind game with him. So I said to him, mate, you're living in Tasmania at the moment. I've just come back from holidays. And I had a really traumatic animal incident in Tasmania. I said I was just wandering through the bush and a lion came up out of the grass, latched onto my leg and tore my leg off. Completely ripped it off. There I am standing there with 2 legs telling him this story. But I thought I'd play I thought I'd play a mind game with him with this story. And I could see the chaos that was starting to happen in his mind. Because contrary to the information I gave him, there I was with 2 shoes, 2 legs. So there was irrefutable evidence before him that this didn't happen. But yet the manner in which I delivered it, with the credibility that I have, created the turmoil. And so I kept a straight face, and you learn as a uniformed police officer to keep a straight face when you're dealing with the public over either things that you find extremely amusing, or if you're trying to baffle certain criminals and bluff your way into or out of situations. So I kept a straight face for maybe 5 seconds, probably a very long 5 seconds. And then I sort of had a bit of a smirk and I said, well, look, actually that's not true. That's not exactly correct. A wombat came out of the bush and bit my shoe. And we had a bit of a giggle about it. But he didn't know that I was making an assessment of him. And for so long, we have been doing the same thing. We are ignoring the irrefutable evidence before us because we're giving preference to the credibility of the messenger. And that was the point. And I don't think I explained that. I don't think I explained that to him because he was just listening to the story and he thought it was just an amusing anecdote. But the time for us to listen to a message and accept that message based on the credentials of the person delivering it are gone. We can no longer do that. And so what we've got to do is we've got to actually look at the irrefutable evidence before us, which I think, as one of our speakers, maybe Jackie, said, it was an IQ test, wasn't it? What we've just been through. The irrefutable evidence was they told us it was 99.97% survivable. Yet if you don't get that shot and you talk to your neighbour over the fence, you're probably going to kill them. So what we now need to do is not worry about what letters someone has in front of their name or what credentials they have, what colour their suit is, whether it's a white suit or if they have a stethoscope around their neck or if they're on television. We've actually got to independently and critically analyse the message. Because when I said to that young guy that the lion bit my leg off, he should have just looked and said, "You idiot, you got two legs." Okay? But he couldn't, because the message was delivered with credibility from a trusted source. But that trusted source with credibility was able to deliver a ridiculous message, and he wasn't quite able to deal with that. And that's where we've been for probably our whole lives until now. I think coming from the unique perspective that I do as having spent my career and my adult life as a serving police officer, I'm not going to talk about what you've heard from other people. What I want to do is give you something for your toolbox. Because I spent a lot of my career, the last half of my career, training junior officers. And I'd have to equip them for all sorts of interesting situations. And one thing I found very interesting was a technique developed by a chap, I might have to check his name, former American colonel. I should give him the credibility. An Air Force Colonel Boyd in the 1990s, John Boyd. He developed a 4-stage process to help not only military personnel, but anyone actually understand a combative situation. Now, you may or may not have heard of it. It's called an OODA loop, O-O-D-A. So I actually adopted this in training some of my junior colleagues. And I think it's something that's applicable for all of us. We can all use it. So I'll just run you through it. But it's basically a very simple 4-stage thing that we can all apply to our lives, and it can help us progress through situations. For instance, if we're in a burning building here, and we identify that the roof's starting to collapse, and then we identify there's a lot of smoke and it's getting hard to breathe, and then we identify the floor's getting hot. We identify all these problems, but we don't actually do anything to progress our situation. Then we're locked down into inaction through fear. So we need to have things in our toolbox. So the OODA loop is what I want to run you through. The first O stands for observe. So when we'd have street level enforcement and we'd be going after certain criminals, I'm not talking about mums going through stop signs and so on, all right? When we're going to pull over a target vehicle, I'd train my colleagues to first make your observation. Now, whoever gets to the end of this 4-stage process generally is in the best position to win. The problem for a police officer is your criminal is already probably near the end of that 4-stage process when you're in the start of it. So the first stage is observation. We observe our criminal. Then we orientate, so we move into a position to engage them. Observe, orientate, then we make a decision. So you turn on the flashy lights, the party lights, pull over the car. And then A stands for action. Observe, orientate, decide, and act. Now, unfortunately for the police officer, the criminal is already in his action stage. So I had to train my colleagues to change that situation, put the criminal back into an observation stage whilst they orientate, decide, and they make their actions. Now, how does that relate to you? Unfortunately, our opponents in this whole situation are well into their action stage. Now, if we stay in an observation stage, if we stay in the start of that 4-stage loop, we're nowhere near winning. We can't even engage. So what you've got to do is you've got to make your observations, but you can't stay there. You can't just stay in an observation stage. It's like fear needs to be your motivator. If fear doesn't motivate you, then it cripples you, right? If I brought someone up on stage and I had a cricket ball, and I said, put your hands behind your back, and I threw the ball straight at your face, you're going to instantly feel fear. Now, if that fear motivates you to move or to catch the ball, then fear serves you well. If fear cripples you, you're going to get a black eye. So fear can serve you for a very short period of time. But if you stay in observation, then you're probably locked down into fear. And we all know that that's one of their main weapons, to keep us in fear. So what I encourage you to do is observe what's happening. Try not to be black-pilled if you understand that terminology, which I can address in a moment. Make your observations, but then orientate yourself. Start to do things where you start getting out of just an observation stage and start doing things towards making your decisions and then taking action. Whether that action be financial, whether it be educating yourself, preparing yourself through different learning, different real estate, if you're moving, if you're moving into different communities, whatever it be, you need to be in a state of action. So it's all good and well for us to know what's happening. It's all good and well for us to scroll through our favourite podcasts and to listen to what's happening around the world. But if you get locked into an observation stage, they're still in the action stage, aren't they? They're acting upon us and we're not doing anything. And that's where black pilling comes in. So if you're black pilled, I'd encourage you to break yourself out of that. Red pill, obviously, you've woken up. Blue pill, you're asleep. But black pill means that red pill's gone sour. And it's to the stage where everything you see is bad. Everything you look for pours your energy into that negativity. You only need to look for so long and your trauma cup should be full, right? I know my trauma cup overflowed years ago. What do a lot of people do? They go and get themselves a bigger cup. And then they get a pot. And before you know it, they've got themselves a bath that they're getting into. You can't keep taking it on board. So once your trauma cup overflows, well, put it down. Move out of an observation stage. Don't see everything through a black pill lens. Observe, orientate, then make your decisions. Actually make decisions about what you're going to do. Are you going to get into precious metals? Are you going to look into chlorine dioxide solution, as has been mentioned? Are you going to look into your nutrition, clean water, earthing, sun gazing? All these things that can physically help the body. Look, we're told in the good book that we are made in God's image. Now, whether you have a faith or not, that's a matter for yourself. But if we're made in God's image, we are not junk. We are designed to heal. We give our bodies the right circumstances and we can make incredible healing. But you've got to do the right things. You've got to be drinking clean water. I say you've got to be earthing. You've got to be in sunshine. The circle of friends you keep. All of these things have to nourish you. You need daily nourishment, not daily black pilling. So don't spend your time buried in rabbit holes. Once you know, you know. You don't need to keep looking at it. Stay aware, but don't be buried in it, okay? Because that will just lead you into a place where you don't act. You stay in observation. You never orientate. You never make decisions as the government or whoever it is that you see as your adversary continue in their action stage. One last thing I'll leave you with, which I think is a very powerful mental image for you to take. And again, it's from the Bible, 1 John 5. And that is that the light shines in the darkness. And the darkness cannot comprehend it. So here we are in a well-lit auditorium. And I challenge anyone here to be able to bring darkness into this auditorium. You couldn't do it. And I'm not talking spiritual or emotional darkness. I'm talking physical world. How could anyone walk into this room and bring darkness? They can't. Why is that? Why can't you bring physical darkness in here? What if we turn out all the lights and this place is completely black? And someone walks in with a candle. You can bring light into darkness. Okay? The two cannot exist happily together. One of them must retreat. And it's the darkness. Darkness must retreat in the presence of light. And that light doesn't have to be great. In the size of this auditorium, if we were all sitting here in the dark, couldn't find an exit, and then Dave comes in with a candle and says, "Follow me," all of us would find our way out just through one candle, because the light's incredibly powerful. The light reaches an incredible distance. But as I say, with all these lights on, I challenge anyone to show me how you can bring darkness here. You can't, because darkness cannot comprehend the light. The only way darkness persists is in the absence of light. Light has to retreat. So when we stay in observation, and when we shut down and when we don't act, we're carrying that candle out of the room and we're allowing the darkness to persist. That's the only way that it can reside, in the absence of light. Each one of us is a light, whether it be from a faith base or just from an action base. We all carry light. And so I encourage you to carry your light. You don't have to have a voice on stage. You don't have to be on social media. But silence is consent. So if you're silent, you're in darkness. We all have a circle of influence. For some of us, it's small, but maybe only one person needs to hear your message. But silence is consent. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I will leave it there, but I strongly encourage you to spend time away from your screen, spend time back in nature, all right? Get connected with the earth. And as I always have done, if you haven't got a faith, I encourage you to at least explore that. Because we're made in God's image, we're made for great things. Okay. God bless you and God bless our nation.
Even when you look at Roland, you think, wow, I'd like to be like that. Just fabulous. Well, we've had a great afternoon so far and a real turn. And Adrien McCrae, wouldn't you like to clone 100 politicians like that? We should. Well, maybe we'll talk to Steve. He might know someone. But the same for Steve. I mean, you meet these people, you read about them, and you're meant to be disappointed when you meet your heroes type of thing, and it's the opposite when you're in this room. Steve, I'm going to remember this speech forever. You blew my mind, and I grew into this business that we do by reporting COVID stats from my bedroom because the government lied to us. And you saw it on the 11 o'clock, and you looked at the government website and they weren't the same. And you've turned it into something that we can aspire to as researchers, as people who want to make a difference, and realising that the system, through closing us down, is what is harming us. And then Adrien gets up here with Joel and blows your mind, and you think, wow, we can all do this. Just a normal man from Port Hedland. Pretty talented, skilled guy just the same, but an average bloke. And Dave O'Neill's going through and coming up and exciting us all like only Dave can. Like, he's our very own Burt Reynolds. You know, and many other things that you can think of. But isn't that what we need? Isn't that what we need, is people to look up to? And then he's out here praising the credentials of Hoodie, who we all know and love, right? Our Qantas pilot, the flying kangaroo, the one that we're all meant to be proud of, and we are. And then Jackie, I haven't even got there yet. I mean, Jackie, you know, just literally blew us off the stage by, again, coming to with a message of understanding and work and research and an approach to say, you know what, just tweed. That's what everyone else does. Well, that's not what we do. And we're never going to be like that. And how is it that somehow being inquisitive is usurped by being ignorant in Australia and in the world today? It doesn't make sense. How can not knowing be better than trying to find out? And so for our next guest, this is a man who we have a very different bond, because John Larter worked with my late mother. And every time I see John, I feel like my mother's back on my shoulder. And when you find out how these two met and worked together, and you realise that all of us in this room have been touched by the events of the last 5 years. And just for the fun of it, can you please just lift your hand up if you have, or you know someone who was harmed by the government narrative? Bloody hell. Look at that. Everyone in the room. How many people died from COVID? One. Sorry. But if you look around the room and you realise that everyone in this room, one way or another, is, as Roland just gave us an example of way to play it out, we're trying to heal from PTSD. Now, in mental health or in psychology or whatever it is, they show you a thing called a drama triangle. Anyone heard of it? So you have a victim, a rescuer, and you have a persecutor. And a good counsellor will tell you that the only way out of this cycle of being the rescuer and the victim is you've got to become the persecutor. You've literally got to get yourself out of it. What I notice in this room and in this community is that we're not victims. What we are trying to do is not just survive, but lead to thrive. And what Roland just explained to us is a pathway to thriving. You can go down as many black little rabbit holes as you want, but as he said, once you know, you know, and when you wake up, you never go back to sleep. But what we have to do is live our best lives whilst we're going through this restructuring of whatever this world is. You know what's really interesting? I'll make this point. There's a documentary maker out there who walked out when I asked you to put your hand up. And I thought that just taught me everything I need to know and exactly what Roland just said when he explained the reasons why the credentials always rule. So in other words, we've got to rise above it. And what a perfect time to introduce you to John Larter, a paramedic who served a quarter of a century. Took on the system because of the health hazard who was actually the health minister. And there is no shame in being defeated when the system is working against you. The power is in the ability to take it on. But to be fair, not to be misjudged, not to be selectively edited, but to be out there warts and all. And John is the co-host of this fabulous show that you've all watched, Club Grubbery, with Hoodie. And I can't wait to hear what my friend, John Larter, the president of the Aligned Council, because he's also been a deputy mayor and a current councillor. And if you want something done, you ask a busy person, and that man is John Larter.
Well, thanks everyone. Can you remind me, as I'm finishing up, if I haven't read my daughter's poem to you, to yell out so I do it, because I don't want to forget. But first of all, can we get the formalities out of the way? I'd like to welcome you to country. Welcome you to our bloody country. And can I say, I love Donald Trump because Donald Trump loves his country.
Yeah.
He loves it. And that's why I think we should all stand for the national anthem and show our country that we love it.
Yeah. Go on. Let's do it.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth fertile. Our home is God by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair. Beneath the radiant sun.
We might draw the line there. Unless we forget for those diggers that have fallen for this country, unless we forget for all those that have died at the hands of these grubs that have inflicted this COVID madness around the world. And that includes so many people, those that were coerced into having it, those that are injured, those that lost work. You know their stories, they're wide and they're afar and they're an absolute disgrace. Dunny paper. Now, 5 years ago, everyone in this room would have piled on that. But it's been recycled. That's now the peer-reviewed papers of Brad Hazard and Dr. Kerry Chant. That's got everything you need to know. That's everything there. The peer-reviewed papers on the transmission, the effectiveness, the data that supports it. Thanks, Kerry. Thanks for having me here today. And look, I feel a bit amiss without me sidekick here, Hoodie, but I'm sure he's watching from home. And I'd like you all to say a big hello to Hoodie. 3 cheers. Hip hip. Hip hip. Hip hip. He's here in spirit. Club Grubbery is an unbelievable free speech, independent media tool that is the people's. And it tells the story of ordinary Australians doing extraordinary things. I met one an hour ago, Anne-Marie, told me that she fell off a cliff as a kid. She was the first person to be rescued by a helicopter in Victoria, a police helicopter, winched 23 metres after falling down a cliff. And she decided from that moment that she wanted to devote her life to medicine. And these grubs took it away from her. This is the sort of stories that we tell on Club Grubbery and places like Cafe Locked Out, my good mate Michael. Who we work beautifully with, because Michael goes around and interviews all these people and then we interview them later, and you know, it works beautifully. Thanks, Michael. But we've been very fortunate. We've had some great guests on Club Grubbery. We've had people like Naomi Wolf, a lot of the doctors that were mentioned, Dr. Peter McCullough, Pierre Corey. We've had Paul Marrick. We've had Angus Dalgleish, all the famous Australian ones that have done such wonderful work here in Australia standing up. They're too many to mention. We've even had Steve on as well. So we've been really privileged. I think we've done well over 500 interviews, which is remarkable. It's really remarkable. But the work goes on. You know, and every one of you in in society needs to go out and infect somebody else, whether it be in a taxi, in a supermarket queue. You need to tell your stories. We're one part of it, and we're grateful to be part of this whole independent media process because we are the new media. We are telling the truth. We're telling your stories. We haven't got the bias that these main media groups have. And I want to thank those media people like Chris Smith that have done the right thing. Ben Fordham, in part, that have done the right thing. They have told some of our stories, some of our incredibly heart-wrenching stories. They've raised alarm out in the public about the dangers of these mRNA vaccines. And I thank them for it. They are part of the solution. We need to work with them as well. We can't see the enemy here. We don't know who it is. But they are out there working against us, like our Prime Minister, who's signing us up to this IHR. I mean, that's an absolute disgrace, what's going on there. Essentially will allow these grubs at the WHO to come in and declare a pandemic, and then in Western Australia they've got legislation, and Adrien McCrae can attest to this, that says that you can forcefully go into your home and be locked down and injected. Are our police aware that this is embedded in legislation in WA? It'll only be moments before it's in all these other states, and we are in for one hell of a ride, people. There is no doubt about it. So we need to make sure that we are vigilant. We need to make sure that we are very sensible in our approach, and that we don't let them keep knocking us down by putting up barriers, by stopping people coming through airports. We need to be front and centre, and we need to be very rational and sensible in our approach. We will win this war because we have the truth on our side. And I thank you all for being part of that process. You have been absolutely steadfast in support of Club Grubbery and others in telling those stories and getting that message out in petitions, helping the Aligned Council of Australia. You have been absolutely magnificent. So give yourselves a big round of applause. Can I thank all those people that have put this event on? Under very difficult circumstances, absolute disgrace, this Star Casino pulling the plug. They should be absolutely ashamed of themselves for allowing this to happen. But this is Australia. I mean, we hear the stories from the Vax bus people. They told us that they were touring places and venues that be cancelled in the last hour. So, this is the sort of stuff that's going on. So it's just really, really horrific. Look, just finally, I'll finish up with this poem, and then if anyone wants to ask any questions, I'm happy to take them. This is from my 22-year-old daughter, Jessica. We've pocketed the news, dismissed radio and alternate views, switched the obviousness of a billboard for tiny screens and counterfeit light hues. Dystopian tyrants rule with a population confused. Oblivious construction is complete. On the new human zoo, we have algorithms propelled by capitalism, bottled water and plastic packaging, a fear of boredom and peace. Governments police your mind before they police the streets. I think we dangerously assume that historically certain people were immune. To propaganda clause, we say they had to have had a clue. They had to have known none of it was true. How bold of our society to conclude as we shuffle our families in front of the 6 o'clock news.